Gamers, gals, non-binary pals. I want to do a quick little discussion for the YouTubes, one might say. And it is regarding two little tweets that I saw from Farfa and Atrocity TCG. And it has to deal with a little bit of a small discussion point. So Joshua Schmidt, a lot of times on stream and in a lot of videos, say that for the most part you could take decks to locals and you're able to just take XYZ deck to locals. You could take Galaxy Eyes, the Photon to locals. You could take Melodious to locals and you'll do fine, blah 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 blah. Now, a couple people had not really issues, but alternating viewpoints. I know, right? Actually, back and forth discussion instead of drama farming for 10 million clicks. Sorry, MBT Court. I have to make a nuanced discussion every once in a while, otherwise the government shoots me. Of course, it's hard to take Joshua's word on you can win locals with Rogue because he's fucking Joshua Schmidt, of course. Of course he can, but he's right that enough hard work can make you top. Depending on how your locals handles pricing, that's a completely different conversation. Barfa also had a tweet on this, where he's like, yeah, you can play Rogue at your locals because the average homegrown meta player isn't a YCS competitor level, sure. It also doesn't feel great to have to play out of your mind to beat below average players because you can't afford 3 Engraver. I just really dislike that you could definitely play X deck at locals argument because it implies that most locals are filled with dribbling goats who can't tie their shoelaces when the reality is there's a lot of genuinely good locals out there that has fostered champions. Now, this is true. This is just an objectively correct viewpoint on both Joshua Schmidt's and Farfa's and Atrocities. Mad cuz poor. Also true. Yep. Should have gotten a job at McDonald's. Now for most people, it's very unrealistic to be like, hey, just spend $800 on a yugioh Fiendsmith core. It is the best deck. And it's my minimum wage in Spain is $4. What do you want from me?
Spare change. Spare change, ma'am.
If you guys didn't know, the average salary in France is $2,000, which is not a lot. If you guys don't know, minimum wage in the US is still around $7.25. It's very difficult to tell most people to just spend money and buy card Omega lol in order to afford XYZ deck. So this sort of leads to a bunch of people being forced to okay, I have to play a cheaper rogue deck like Melodious or whatever, and then you realize that these cheaper rogue decks and cheaper rogue options are not even that good because you still have to play stuff like Charmies in them. You have to play expensive cards. You have to play Bestials. Druid's Worm is $12 for no reason still. And I think that there's also this weird misconception when it comes to how people kind of view locals. Local Yu-Gi-Oh players, for the most part, have just gotten better. This isn't to say the average player is just a better player, but more along the lines of the opportunity for players to grow in skill has vastly increased compared to previous years, and a lot of players at all levels of competitive play are already seeing vast improvements of their play, enough to bump the average skill level up. Did I just talk myself into a circle? Probably, but that's not the point. The point is, it's one of those things where it's the existence of this resource that it just flat out increases the skill level. If I want to say how to get good at Yu-Gi-Oh, you're gonna see a lot more videos from Jesse Cotton or Joshua Schmidt or maybe even Team APS or Pack. There are a lot more resources for just the average player to get better relative to 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, just because a lot more of this activity was gate kept. Think of only certain testing circles were given the resources and ideology in order to play XYZ deck. Think of certain pros only kept certain combo lines to themselves or that sort of deal. As well as the fact that far less pros even just existed back in the day. Far less professional players were making content back in the day or able to explain themselves in a manner where the average player can understand. It's kind of like the curse of knowledge, where because you so thoroughly understand something, explaining it to other people is very difficult because you kind of rely on a lot of internalized shorthand that you kind of unconsciously expect other people to know. One example of this was I was trying to teach Rosalind how to ice skate the other day, and I'm just oh, you just kind of push off and you just kind of balance on one leg and push off and extend your leg outwards. in order to like move forwards. And you know, as an ice skater, or like as anyone who's done like rollerblades before, it's kind of like, yeah, you just kind of stand on one leg, push off. But to like a new skater, you may think, oh, how do I balance? How do I properly balance on one leg? That sort of skill hasn't been acquired yet. How do I properly push off? Should I push off to the side or downwards? That's not very intuitive. These sort of resources are getting far more better at explaining these sort of concepts to people, and you know, are just like more publicly available. Instead of having to like take 50 ice skating lessons, you can now just pull up a YouTube tutorial on your phone and be like, how to ice skate in like 3 minutes, which is both a blessing and a curse. Not really a curse, but more just like, it makes the average locals experience far more competitive than what it used to be. Local Lear, seen significantly more people priced out over the last 3 months. People simply do not like being forced to spend regularly to afford a decent chance. Yeah, unfortunately, that's just like forever going to be an issue with Konami. I think a lot of people saw like Bonanza and Megatons and quarter century stuff as like, yes, Konami's finally gonna make the game like cheap for players. And it's like, no. Ryzeo is gonna cost $500 on release. No. Every single one of these cards, $35 per copy. And it's just like, okay, I'll go fuck myself. When you're trying to buy Fiendsmith, it's like, no. This short print, I believe we make it $110 on TCG Player. They're gonna make Edison format cheap for players? You know, theoretically, yeah. But even like formats like Edison are starting to like get expensive. This isn't to say like Edison's like an expensive format like compared to the TCG, like not at all. If you look at cards like Dimensional Prison, which are like staples in Edison, this card is like $5 because its latest printing was in like maximum gold, and this is a staple in literally every single deck. $5 for a common. Another very easy example is like Phyrexian Cluster Amaryllis. Like, this is one of the best decks in Edison. It's arguably like a top 3 or 4 deck in general, but the main reason it doesn't have like crazy representation is just because like it's so expensive. It's so like, why is this card not seeing a reprint yet? As well as like look at Magical Android, like essential card for the format, and it's like $23. Trap Dust Shoot, excellent card for the format. Like, if you want to buy anything that's not like a damaged copy, it's going to cost you like $6. Pulling the Rug. This card is like $5 even after an OTS reprint. Like, Konami is perpetually going to gatekeep players out of the game from a price perspective. And that is just something people have to understand, that just kind of praying to Konami and be like, please reprint my Molch armies, is not always going to get them there. This little statement right here, it also doesn't feel great to have to play out of your mind to beat a below average player because you can't afford 3 engraver, is also true. Like, one of the main reasons I stopped playing Labyrinth in paper was just because, like, why should I try and like sweat my ass off trying to think of like 500 different Labyrinth deck lists in order to be like techno for my locals, when I could just be like, you know what, fuck it, turn my brain off, spend $400 and buy Fiendsmith Ryzeo and literally never have a record worse than like 3-1. And that's because, like, you know, like some of these decks are just so overtuned and so autopilot compared to other decks. And like the one you do lose is just like, you know, you break Dragon God-handed. Like, there's nothing you can do about that. Hot take, the solution to budget player struggles is to be more social and to borrow the cards they need to compete at a high level. Now, this is a very interesting take. This kind of implies a lot of things, in the sense where not only you have vendor friends, but those vendor friends are A, willing to let you borrow cards, or B, your locals just randomly has super rich people that are just willing to like lend you cards. It's one thing if your locals is like in a very metropolitan area and, you know, the average GDP of your locals is like in the 6 digits. You know what I mean? Like, if you're at like Gamer's Choice or like a California or a Philadelphia locals, the odds of you being able to like meet vendor friends or people with like extra playsets of copies of like Molch armies or whatever is going to be way higher compared to like if you live in fucking like Tennessee or Milwaukee or I don't fucking know, like Idaho. Additionally, like, you also have to make friends with these people. You know, like, making friends with people is cool, but let's just be real. Like, people can kind of sniff out if they're kind of just being talked to only so that you can, like, borrow their Molch army playset. And additionally, Like, sometimes people just don't want to lend out cards. Not everyone is going to have like extra playsets of Molch armies. And not everyone is going to have like a couple $100 extra and think, oh, I should just buy an extra Molch army playset in case my friends want to buy some. Like a very small percentage of people even think anywhere close to that. I do that because I'm a fucking freak, but you know. Shout out to Zach, by the way. He has my fucking Perulias. I want that shit back. At my local shop, I know a lot of people where if I were to ask, can I borrow X card, I'm always informed that the only ones they have are the place that they own, which is in their deck. I fucking hate that. Whenever I'm like, hey, can I borrow like XYZ card? They're like, I have it at home, or nah, I'm using it. Just say no. Just say like you don't have it. Like, you're not helping me. The deck thing doesn't really matter, but like the saying you have it at home, like literally is so stupid. I'm like, why did you say anything then? Like, are you gonna drive home? You gonna call your fucking Uber package delivery to like hand that shit back to me? I hope so. It's like, oh my god, I get it. But yeah, also, someone mentioned earlier the car analogy, where it's like lending the keys to your car. You're gonna need a lot of trust if you're gonna like do that. Because yeah, if someone like bends your cards, if someone like damages your cards, like, what do you do then? Like, if Rosalind played Yu-Gi-Oh! And I lend her a playset of like Fuelos, and she like bends them in half, like, what do I do with them? Like, I know for a fact they can't pay me back because they can't afford to even buy the card in the first place for themselves. Like, what do I do? Like, am I just supposed to be like, oh, I'm just never gonna lend out cards again? Like, sure, but then that opens up like a whole other can of worms in regards to like what the friendship is. And then it's just like this whole messy, shitty scenario that people just don't want to get involved in. In certain circumstances, this is probably true, but who has 3 copies of Engraver lying around that they're loading out? If people own Engraver right now, chances are they're using them. Yeah, exactly. Like 99% of people just don't have shit laying around. It's just not a thing. You should really visit a mid/small size store. The one near me had 1 Fuelos pulled throughout the entire Rota season. The cards are literally not available to borrow. Yeah, that's also like another thing. Even if you do have rich friends, even if they are vendors, even if these are people who buy multiple playsets of cards just to own, lend out, or sell, it also doesn't beat the fact that sometimes these people just sell the cards. Like, one of my friends, K-Woo, he's a vendor. Whenever I would ask him for like, hey, do you have like Dominus Impulse QCR? Do you have like X card QCR? Do you have like X staple playset? Like, half the time he'll just be like, no, I sold them all, or I just haven't pulled any. Like, you can't expect your local vendor to be like a fucking TCG player store where they have every single card, unless his name is like exactly Brian Chen. At the end of the day, inventory is not unlimited, you know what I mean? Realistically, the only way you have extras is pulling it. Yep. If you're playing a rogue deck, then you are definitely having an uphill battle. It's not a rogue deck because it can win easily. That's the meta deck. When people counter argument this with, oh, that's still hard. Yes, it's harder. That's the point. The problem is that yes, it's going to be a hard battle, but sometimes it is literally impossible based on your skill level, which you could argue is just like a haha get good. But sometimes an above average player, I'm going to fucking flex myself and just say like me on Labyrinth, sometimes it's just going to have a literally impossible matchup versus Ryziel because like 40% of the time I'm just going to auto lose because I lose a dice roll, or they open like Ash/Abyssial, like 5 bajillion, etc. Like, it's not hard to play through like the Labyrinth board if you're able to play a deck as basically autopilot as like Ryziel, or you're able to play a deck with like a bajillion extenders like Malice at times. It is just like blah. It depends on the locals. I remember in college there was a dude who played Blue Eyes exclusively, but in other locals there were those who played meta. Yeah, objectively true. Like, everyone who's in like a city has like 2 to 4 locals to pick from in like a major metropolitan area, and everyone knows like there's always 1 super sweaty locals and 1 free locals. You know what I'm talking about. The locals were like 6 people show up and like they're all playing like the shittiest decks imaginable, like Plunder Patrol, FTK, or like Reptilian, or like Yang Zing, or like Dinosaur. You get the idea. And then there's just like the other local where it's like 40% Malice, 45% Fiendsmith Ryziel, 5% like maybe some random off-meta jank like Fiendsmith Tenpai or like Primite Pacifist. Like, we all know like depending on which locals you go to, some are like way more real than others, but most locals are starting to like on that little spectrum are starting to lean more and more towards the hyper meta, hyper optimized thing, just because more and more Yu-Gi-Oh fans are growing up and gaining disposable income, and the rift between people with disposable income to spend on like $800 decks and those who just realistically can't because of like financial situations or cost of living, depending on where you are, it kind of leads to like this very shitty dichotomy. But that's just my 2 cents on this whole little thing. This is just a very abstract discussion where like both sides are kind of right and have their own little flaws. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Let me know what your favorite locals is in the comment section down below. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video.